Semester after semester, we studied the Middle East conflict as if it was the most complex conflict in the world, when in fact, it is probably the easiest conflict in the world to explain. It may be the hardest to solve, but it is the easiest to explain. In a nutshell, it's this. One side wants the other side dead. Israel wants to exist as a Jewish state and to live in peace. Israel also recognizes the right of Palestinians to have their own state and to live in peace. The problem, however, is that most Palestinians and many other Muslims and Arabs do not recognize the right of the Jewish state of Israel to exist. This has been true since 1947, when the United Nations voted to divide the land called Palestine into a Jewish state and an Arab state. The Jews accepted the United Nations partition, but no Arab or any other Muslim country accepted it. When British rule ended on May 15, 1948, the armies of all the neighboring Arab states, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Transjordan, and Egypt, attacked the one-day-old state of Israel in order to destroy it. But to the world's surprise, the little Jewish state survived. Then it happened again. In 1967, the dictator of Egypt, Gamal Abdel Nasser, announced his plan, in his words, to destroy Israel. He placed Egyptian troops on Israel's border, and armies of surrounding Arab countries were also mobilized to attack. However, Israel preemptively attacked Egypt and Syria. Israel did not attack Jordan and begged Jordan's king not to join the war. But he did. And only because of that did Israel take control of Jordanian land, specifically the West Bank of the Jordan River. Shortly after the war, the Arab states went to Khartoum, Sudan, and announced their famous three no's: no recognition, no peace, and no negotiations. What was Israel supposed to do? Well, one thing Israel did a little more than a decade later in 1978 was to give the entire Sinai Peninsula, an area of land bigger than Israel itself and with oil, back to Egypt, because Egypt, under new leadership, signed a peace agreement with Israel. So Israel gave land for the promise of peace with Egypt, and it has always been willing to do the same thing with the Palestinians. All the Palestinians have ever had to do is recognize Israel as a Jewish state and promise to live in peace with it. But when Israel has proposed trading land for peace, as it did in 2000, when it agreed to give the Palestinians a sovereign state in more than 95% of the West Bank and all of Gaza, the Palestinian leadership rejected the offer and instead responded by sending waves of suicide terrorists into Israel. Meanwhile, Palestinian radio, television, and school curricula remain filled with glorification of terrorists, demonization of Jews, and the daily repeated message that Israel should cease to exist. So it's not hard to explain the Middle East dispute. One side wants the other dead. The motto of Hamas, the Palestinian rulers of Gaza, is, "We love death as much as the Jews love life." There are 22 Arab states in the world, stretching from the Atlantic Ocean to the Indian Ocean. There is one Jewish state in the world, and it is about the size of New Jersey. In fact, tiny El Salvador is larger than Israel. Finally, think about these two questions. If tomorrow Israel laid down its arms and announced, "We will fight no more," what would happen? And if the Arab countries around Israel laid down their arms and announced, "We will fight no more," what would happen? In the first case, there would be an immediate destruction of the state of Israel and mass murder of its Jewish population. In the second case, there would be peace the next day. As I said at the outset, it is a simple problem to describe. One side wants the other dead. And if it didn't, there would be peace. Please remember this. There has never been a state in the geographic area known as Palestine that was not Jewish. Israel is the third Jewish state to exist in that area. There was never an Arab state, never a Palestinian state, never a Muslim or any other state. That's the issue. Why can't the one Jewish state the size of El Salvador be allowed to exist? That is the Middle East problem.
Is it racist to criticize the Palestinians as the world's most tiresome crybabies with a bogus cause and a plight that's entirely self-inflicted? I bet it is. I wouldn't be surprised if it was against the law in certain European countries, but I'm going to do it anyway because somebody has to. And I realise I'll probably lose a few friends with this video, but that's okay. Friends like that I can do without. All any of us can do is to tell the truth as we see it. I mean, as we actually see it, and not as we think we're supposed to see it. The worst thing you can do is to see the truth and to tell a lie, and I see the Palestinian cause as a lie designed to exploit Western liberal guilt, like the lie of Islamophobia and the lie of the mythical religion of peace that nobody has ever seen in action. I used to be a lot more critical of Israel, and I used to believe there was a fairly simple two-state solution because I used to believe the Arabs were acting in good faith. I still want to believe that, but the evidence tells me I'd be a fool to believe it. Because I've seen that every concession Israel makes is met with more demands and more excuses not to negotiate. They could have had peace 10 times over if they wanted it, but they don't want peace, they want victory, and they won't be happy till Israel is wiped from the map. A member of Fatah's Central Committee said as much on television recently, but as he said, they keep that to themselves and tell the rest of the world a different story. And as part of that story, the bogus claim for Palestinian statehood is currently passing through the United Nations, and we're all waiting to see what plops out the other end. Not that it really matters, because despite what the Palestinian public relations industry, i.e. the Western media, might tell you, this is not about territory, and it certainly isn't about justice or human rights, because Arab societies don't know the meaning of those words. It's about Jew hatred as mandated by the Quran and as preached in the mosques and taught to the children in Arab countries day in and day out, generation after poisoned generation. The Arabs don't hate Jews because of Israel, they hate Israel because of Jews. The situation in the West Bank and Gaza exists because 45 years ago, several Arab countries attacked Israel unprovoked with overwhelming odds because it was a Jewish state. If it hadn't been a Jewish state, they wouldn't have attacked it. And they attacked with the intention of wiping it from the map and of committing genocide. But they failed because the Jews had a bit more steel in their blood than the Arabs had bargained for. And who could be surprised after what they'd been through, and after seeing how the rest of the world had responded to their plight? Large numbers of Jews could have escaped the Nazis if they'd had somewhere else to go, but other countries wouldn't let them in. The Mufti of Jerusalem at the time was a friend of Hitler's, and, good Muslim that he was, he approved of the final solution and had plans for his own Holocaust in the Middle East once the Nazis had won the war. So who can blame the Israelis today for defending themselves as if they mean it, when they know they're dealing with people they know they can't trust and who they know hate them enough to want to exterminate them as a people? Anybody else in their situation would behave the same way. I know I would, and I wouldn't apologise for it. Israel is surrounded by enemies. Peace is more in their interest than in anyone else's, which is why they keep making concessions. But it's not in the interest of the Palestinian leadership. Peace is the last thing they want. They need to keep the pot boiling. They need to keep their people angry and resentful and hating Jews. Peace would ruin everything because they won't be happy until Israel is wiped from the map and the Jews have been driven into the sea. If they really believe that's going to happen, they're insane. And if they don't really believe it, they're even more insane, wouldn't you say? And all you good-hearted Western liberals who keep banging the drum for the poor Palestinians, I sympathise with you because you're doing it for the right reason. But you're being used and exploited, just as the people in the West Bank and Gaza are being exploited by people who have no intention of negotiating peace because they're driven primarily by crude, irrational religious hatred. When you protest for Palestine, you know you'll be in the company of people calling for Jews to be gassed. Do you think that's an accident? You're dealing with something here beyond politics and beyond reason, something truly ugly that drives a spike through all your cosy left-right assumptions, and your naivety is helping to stoke it like bellows to a fire. The world needs to stop pretending that Palestine is about justice and human rights and have the moral courage to call this thing what it is, to put a stop to this charade, this endless dance around a non-existent negotiating table. We need to do the Arabs a huge favour and tell them the truth they so badly need to hear, that their hatred is the cause of their misery. They become prisoners of it. It has come to define their very identity. And until they can find a way to remove this ugly stain from their hearts, they'll always be chained to it, and they and their children will never be free. Arab Spring or no Arab Spring. Peace. How many wasted generations of hate do you think it'll take?
Yes.
Good evening. I just wanted to say thank you for coming to campus tonight and presenting your point of view. It's always valuable to have two sets of views going on at the same time. Very useful. My name is Jumana Imad Musa Ahmed Al-Bahri, and I'm a student here at UCSD. I was reading your literature. I found that much more interesting than the talk. And I found some interesting things about the MSA, which is an organization that's very active on campus, and it is hosting our annual Hitler Youth Week. You should come out to those events. If you could clarify the connection between the MSA and jihad terrorist networks, because last I checked, we had to do our own fundraising, and we never get help from anyone. So if you could clarify the connection between UCSD's MSA, or if you don't have such information, if you could connect other MSAs on UC's, because the connection wasn't too clear in the pamphlet. Just if you could clarify.
Okay. Will you condemn Hamas here and now?
I'm sorry, what?
Will you condemn Hamas
Would I condemn Hamas?
as a terrorist genocidal organization?
Are you asking me to put myself on a cross?
So you won't. I actually have had this experience many times. You didn't read the pamphlet because the pamphlet is chapter and verse. The main connection is that the MSA is part of the Muslim Brotherhood network as revealed in the documents.
I don't think you understood what I meant by that. I meant if I say something, I'm sure that I will be arrested for reasons of Homeland Security. So if you could please just answer my question.
If you condemn Hamas, Homeland Security will arrest you.
If I support Hamas, because your question forces me to condemn Hamas. If I support Hamas, I look really bad.
If you won't condemn Hamas, obviously you support it. Case closed. I have had this experience, I had this experience at UC Santa Barbara where there were 50 members of the Muslim Students Association sitting right in the rows there. And throughout my hour talk, I kept asking them, will you condemn Hezbollah and Hamas? And none of them would. And then when the question period came, the president of the Muslim Students Association was the first person to ask questions. And I said, before you start, will you condemn Hezbollah? And he said, well, that question is too complicated for a yes-no answer. So I said, okay, I'll put it to you this way. I'm a Jew. The head of Hezbollah has said that he hopes that we will gather in Israel so he doesn't have to hunt us down globally. For it or against it?
For it.
Thank you.